Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we got some exciting new updates for Soulframe, the upcoming open world action combat fantasy themed MMO from Warframe developer Digital Extremes. They first revealed the game just last month and I was immediately interested as there's a lot of really cool ideas that they're talking about, many of which ways they are trying to diverge from their prior game, be it the slower paced, more melee and magic focused combat, the fact that the game is going to have full on open world, the procedural dungeon system, even just the fact that they're calling it an MMO is enough to pique my interest, you know, 'cause I'm a degenerate. Anyway, since last month's reveal, there have been interviews, a developer blog, a live stream, and some tweets, all of which provide us with a whole heap of new details about the game. Some pretty cool stuff here, and I'll be covering every bit of it here in today's video. Let's just dive right in. For starters, they released a developer vlog. This was a bit of a roundtable discussion with various members of the team, including the community, creative, audio, and art directors, along with Steve Sinclair, who introduced himself as a programmer and writer. In reality, he was basically the creator of Warframe, although I appreciate the modesty and the fact that he appears to still be doing like honest in the trenches development work. Good on ya. So this video was fairly basic and brief, although they did cover a few major points about how development is going, where the game's currently at, and what we should expect going forward. So they said Soulframe is very early in the development process. In fact, they just began building the game for real in spring of this year, although they have been working on the world, lore, art, and other pre-production stuff for some time now. The culmination of this revealed in that announcement trailer, which they say is basically a tone piece for the game, which is going to be this fantasy, magic-infused world centered on themes of nature, restoration, and history. And as I mentioned in my last video, I think this thing looks great in terms of its theming and setting. Beyond that obvious Digital Extremes aesthetic of the character and armor designs, it clearly draws heavy inspiration from the likes of Princess Mononoke and The Never-Ending Story. Those are not my observations, by the way. That is what the developer themselves have said was big inspiration for this work. And I just, that is a setting that really appeals to me. I really like this like fantasy magic infused out in the woods kind of thing with like fairy creatures flying around and stuff. Like it's a cool setting for me. It's really appealing. Oh, and also a tweet from Steve Sinclair sent not too long ago specified that full development of the game has been underway for around 6 months now. So why did they announce the game so early on then? Well, they have said it's because they want to be transparent and involve the community in most of the development process. To that end, they do plan on updating their YouTube channel with a ton of behind the scenes content, videos covering audio design, concept art, their game development philosophy, work on the engine and coding, just a whole lot more of the nitty-gritty, nerdy development stuff. And I think this sort of like super early reveal and transparency through the development process can go one of two ways. Best case scenario, it keeps the community engaged, interested, and involved in the development process. Worst case, it drags out for far too long, the hype dies, and people burn out on the game before it even releases, which has happened time and time again for some of these games. You especially look at some of the Kickstarter games, the Kickstarter MMOs that had very transparent development, developer streams like every day, and then no one cares about the game by the time it comes out. But I will say, the worst case, while not an exception, it's also not the rule. Like, it can go either way. And hey, you know what? I mean, you could say their current game Warframe is an example of that. It's been in constant development and improvement over the past 10 years as a full-on live service title. But of course, the noticeable difference is it's been in that process for these past 10 years while being playable, and we'll have to see how soon Digital Extremes can get Soulframe in people's hands, which, even though it's only had roughly 6 months of development time, a little bit of foreshadowing here, they expect you to be playing it sooner than you might think, which we'll dive into the reasons that might be. Okay, so that was everything from the developer vlog. Now let's talk about their stream. Digital Extremes held a 30-minute live stream recently discussing the team's transition between Warframe and Soulframe, but then also they provided some new interesting details about Soulframe. One big point that they focused on was the fact that they consider Soulframe a sister project to Warframe. What does that mean exactly? Well, Steve specified, in many ways they are the same, in many ways they are different. different. It's going to have a lot in common with what we know how to do, and we're going to try some other different things on top of that. So for instance, similarities between the two games include things like they both use procedural generation. At least for Soulframe, that will be in specific parts of the game, which we'll touch on later. Both titles are also running on the exact same engine using the same base code. They will be repurposing some of the same ideas and tech between the games, and both titles are multiplayer focused. As for the differences, this is where it gets more interesting. Warframe is sci-fi, Soulframe is fantasy. Warframe is focused on shooting, Soulframe focused on melee and magic. Warframe's combat is fast-paced and crazy, Soulframe's combat will be slow and heavy. Warframe is a lobby-based multiplayer game, Soulframe is an open-world MMO. And when you lay it out like that, I can see why they're calling these sister games. There are some clear through lines, but much of it is also an inverse. And when you string the Soulframe bits together, you get a fantasy game focused on melee and magic with slow and heavy combat in an open-world MMO. Man, you could not put together a more perfect sentence for a game that checks most of the boxes of what I am personally interested. You couple that with Digital Extreme's track record of supporting Warframe for the past 10 years of regular updates, we're looking potentially at quite the recipe for success, although bear in mind, we will be navigating the minefield that is a free-to-play MMO and all that entails, because yes, they have confirmed that Soulframe, just like Warframe, will be free-to-play. Now, while my experience has been pretty good with how they've handled Warframe's free-to-play, it's also pretty debatable depending on who you ask. Their model really focuses on a ton of grinding and long build times for crafting, all of which you can speed up and bypass by spending money, and this plays a pretty big role in how the game functions and how their free-to-play model works. Later on top of that is, of course, all of the expected things like cosmetics and boost. We are still a ways away from learning any specifics about Soulframe's free-to-play monetization, and honestly, if I let monetization concerns dissuade me from being interested in games, I would probably just have to quit the hobby altogether, because my favorite genres, these live service games, these loot-based games, these MMOs, they're about the most heavily monetized in all of gaming, with the exception of like sports games like FIFA and that kind of garbage. The genres that I like are the ones that get slapped with the heavy monetization. Fortunately, I still enjoy single-player titles too. Currently playing through God of War on PC. Pretty good, by the way, if you haven't heard. But I predominantly like, these loot games, these multiplayer games, these live service games. If I just stopped caring about games that had this kind of monetization, those are all my favorite games. What am I supposed to do? Back to Soulframe though. One of the cooler parts of the stream was when they gave us a sneak peek at some of their in-development stuff, as they mentioned that they would be doing in that developer vlog. So we saw an environmental shots from one of their current test levels. They said they've been working on this for quite a long time. This particular area set in the woods. We saw some flowing grass and trees, and this was basically an example of their upgraded foliage systems with these procedural animations as this part of the environment moved in response to the wind. Also on display was some new animation technology called motion matching. This pulls from a library of animations every single frame, checking for the best possible transition, the best next animation to put in, while it tries to build the smoothest looking, most natural continuity of motion for the character, or for whatever it is that's being animated. And this is really slick stuff. This sort of AI enhanced animation work has been making big strides in recent years. We're going to be seeing a lot more use of this in games. The bottom line with this tech is it just aims to make more dynamic, natural looking character movement through a world. And yeah, it looks pretty good. Also, most of this work, they said, will make its way back into Warframe. Going back to the idea that these are sister titles, work on either will be used to benefit the other. And I mean, honestly, if you're going to be supporting two live service games simultaneously, this sounds like the way you should do it. As a quick side note here, they really were emphasizing wanting people to know that them working on Soulframe does not mean they're abandoning Warframe. No, in fact, they've got plenty of updates planned for that game for a long road ahead. And as just mentioned, code improvements that they developed for Soulframe will be brought back into Warframe. Seeing as both games run on the same engine, I presume that's not terribly difficult work. Steve did say that this is going to be a very collaborative effort between the two teams, and that there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination and sharing, which of course this is the case, because Warframe continues to be incredibly popular to this day. While I'm sure the game will take take a bit of a population hit when Soulframe first launches. By all accounts, the two games are different enough that they can coexist. It's just that Soulframe will be the new and shinier thing when it comes out, so yeah, it's going to get a lot of attention at first, but the games are quite different. They're inverse in a lot of ways, as we touched on, so those two games can exist. I think this is a very smart approach by them. And yes, since they're both live service games, unless the player base just evaporates for either one, I do expect continuous updates, and Digital Extremes have proven their ability to stick with a game given Warframe's track record of the last 10 years. They went on to do a little bit of diving in and discussion of some of the game's concept art. Don't skip this section though, because there were actually some interesting gameplay relevant details here. So here in this first piece, what we see is a group of sinecures, that's the name for this particular enemy type, gathered around the campfire. Now just beyond them is this chained down omen beast that they captured. This omen beast in particular is called the Orangol, and attached to the beast is a signal balloon that the sinecures use to call in skyships to come take it away. Now apparently as players, we will be working as we play this game, we will be spotting these and want to prevent them from getting taken off into the skyships because, quote, their souls can join with yours and give you all sorts of amazing abilities in the game. And I found that interesting. To me, I expect it will mean one of two things. Either we interact with these beasts, then they will give us a buff, temporary or permanently or whatever, or we can actually meld with them to unlock new abilities, because he says their souls join with yours. It could be a buff, it could be unlocking new abilities. Either one is possible, but yeah, it's just interesting to note. This next piece touches on the game's theme of rebirth. They went on to specify that we play as what are called envoys, who are cast out and must work to reconnect with nature and gain our power back. In video game terms, that clearly means leveling up and gearing, right? But it's here that they also mentioned that the character showcased in this art, as well as in the reveal trailer, is just a template, and we will be able to create a character exactly the way we want, including, to quote the developer, with whatever receding hairlines you think look good. So this, of course, means character creation is going to be in the game. Okay, that's pretty cool. And that is another departure from Warframe, where you are basically playing as a suit of armor. They do have customization, like you can swap out different parts of your frame and you can change the colors, but no actual character creator. Well, Soulframe will have a character creator. All right. And the final piece of concept art they touched on was a close-up of the Orangol, or the super wolf, dire wolf. And then they reiterated that we will find various omen beasts like this one tied down in the game, and we'll have to work to free them. And again, yeah, my best guess is we're gonna see these lanterns floating out in the open world. We'll go to them. There'll be one of these beasts tied up, as well as a group of enemies that we'll have to take on, which is actually just exactly what they showcased in the trailer. And then we interact with the beast, and yeah, we'll probably just get a buff. That's probably what it means, right? We gotta think in video game terms. Okay, some other interesting tidbits that came out of the stream include Steve briefly rapid fire answered a few questions from chat, in which he said the following: Soulframe, yes, it is in very early development. It is going to be free to play. No, it is not single player. Apparently they kept on getting that question. This isn't a single player game. They are specifically referring to it as a hybrid MMO with a way different pacing than Warframe. They said it's focused on cooperative PvE, although you will be able to play the game solo. That is true for most MMOs nowadays. A big chunk of the gameplay, with the exception of the exclusively group focused activities like maybe world bosses or specific types of dungeons. Most MMOs nowadays you can play mostly solo, which is actually what I tend to do. He said they don't have any specific platforms to announce yet, although I will say Warframe is on just about everything: PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and the Switch. There's a good chance Soulframe comes to all of those as well, maybe sans Switch. Of course, it will be coming to PC first via early access, as this early testing takes place. Whether or not the games are in the same universe, they said yes and no, oder jein. There are going to be Easter eggs that connect the two games, but there's no obvious direct connection between the two, if that makes sense. There will be hints that they're in the same universe, but they're not like explicitly constantly telling you. And a few closing notes here. They did say that they've got a super ambitious time frame and are hoping to have people in and playing the game within a year. Now, this would almost certainly be a super early alpha and will no doubt mean it's a very basic version of the game. I don't expect the entire world is built and they're having us test and polish it out, but more likely it's going to be one level with bits of the different different functionality that we can try. In fact, Steven confirmed as much in a response to this tweet, which said, "Is this the type of game where players will be able to play while it's being expanded? So even if the world starts off as one hub area and one tile set for caverns, we might still be able to experience?" Steve said yes. And so that is what they're probably going to build. Probably exactly that. One open world space, call it a zone, and then the procedural dungeons that flow beneath it, and we'll be able to test that, trying out mechanics and different things like that. And as we've seen from that in development stuff, they've got the animations in place. They've got actual visuals. It's not just, we're not going to be looking at a gray box here or anything like that, which is pretty cool. But I expect these contained experiences in the early testing. It was also reiterated in the stream, as a studio, Digital Extremes is in a way different position now than when they first started making Warframe over a decade ago. And for that reason, they want to take this opportunity to bring their established player base along with them for the development of this new game as they pay close attention to community feedback. Now, this can be a double-edged sword, but also it's pretty much what they've done with Warframe, which again continues to be very successful. This game averages around a peak of 50,000 concurrent daily players, putting it constantly in the top 20 games on all of Steam. And Steam is not its only platform. Warframe also has its very own launcher. This is a very popular game, so clearly they're doing something right. And they wrapped up the stream by letting everyone know to keep an eye on their YouTube channel for those development videos, and that they'll be launching their own Soulframe Twitch channel as well soon. And of course, there's their website, which still does have that puzzle, by the way, that needs decoding in order to view the page. They touched on this briefly too. This was kind of cool. They said that the puzzle is of the Ode language, and the Ode are like the invaders of Soulframe's world. Basically, it is a Latin alphabet cipher where you have to just match the letters to the symbols. Two of them you have to guess, but it's a pretty easy process of elimination. They're going to eventually remove this code and just let everyone access the site, but they said they thought it was a fun way to kind of keep things immersive, and then also showcase the Ode language, which will be quite prevalent in the game itself. And going to the website is actually where you can go to reserve your Envoy title, which is either your character name or your account name. I'm not sure which. So that's about everything that was discussed during the stream. I want to touch on a few Twitter posts and things that were said by Steve Sinclair specifically. He was asked if the game was going to be fully open world, kind of like Skyrim, and then maybe some procedurally generated dungeons, or if everything will be pre-built, to which Steve said, "You are almost bang on with our goals in the opener." So he's talking about the first part of that question, which is full-on open world, kind of like Skyrim, with procedurally generated dungeons. Now, I'm not sure if that was ever actually explicitly said. I know, assuming as much in my prior coverage, that this is the direction they were going to be going for, because there was mention of procedural generation. So the obvious conclusion to me was they handcraft a world, dungeons scattered all throughout, they tossed their procedural systems within that. And I like this approach way better than what Warframe does, where you're just like, you're looking at a map of space and then you click into areas, some of which are procedural, some of which are handcrafted, more open in nature, because Warframe does have that. But exploring a big open space, and it would be great if they had all these open zones connected a la Skyrim or MMOs like World of Warcraft. Have the open space just be big, expansive, full exploration, put the procedural stuff underground in the dungeons. That is a great way to do it. I mean, if you're gonna have procedural in MMO, I don't want the overworld procedural, because then it just becomes a vast, uninteresting span of stuff. I just personally don't really enjoy it, but put procedural in dungeons, that's pretty cool. I'm really happy to hear that. He was asked if the game was going to have hard lock versus soft lock, to which he said they currently have a hard lock system, although it may not survive. And he said that he agrees with his thoughts, where basically the point was that hard lock is more like intimate combat, maybe more focused on small scale, 1 versus 1, 1 versus 2, that kind of thing, whereas soft lock systems are greater for massive battles. And Steve said, yeah, I agree. At the current time in the development process, it looks like Soulframe is focused on those small scale battles because they are implementing that hard lock system. This is a divergence from Warframe that I think is a good one, and I hope it does last. I hope they stick to the hard lock system. I don't want to be hacking through huge hordes of enemies. Warframe does that. There are enough games that do that. The idea of a Souls-like MMO with that kind of action combat, heavier, slower paced, hard lock systems, that's good. That is appealing. That is something that I would like to see more of. I'd like to see more blending of those two, action combat and MMO genres, in games going forward, and I hope that they do it in Soulframe. And then finally, Steve responded to this question, asking how many years until we could play the game, and his response was that he hopes that they can have some closed alpha stuff next year, although they're not fully committing. This is just a reiteration of them saying they would like to, within the next 12 months, have this game playable for people. And that's very exciting for me. For many of the stuff that I touched on already, and probably things that I haven't even brought up, there's a lot that is very appealing about this game to me. It is one of the many, many games on the horizon that I'm looking forward to. But in particular, yeah, good things to say about Warframe. Over the years, I keep coming back to it. I have fun. Maybe its free-to-play model isn't ideal for everyone. I can appreciate that. But as someone who casually jumps in and leaves, it's worked out for me. So there you go. But that's going to do it for today's video. A bit of an update on Soulframe. Thank you guys as always for watching. Hope you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.